I recently wrote an article for New Eastern Outlook about aggressive attrition and how it was used to crack Fortress Avdiivka. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm referring to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and Russian military operations to take the city of Avdiivka outside of Donetsk city. Some might consider it the outskirts of Donetsk city. It was heavily fortified by Ukrainian troops, beginning all the way back in 2014 when the Ukrainian government was fighting separatists, Russian-speaking separatists. And since the special military operation began in February 2022, Russian forces have been outside of this city, wearing down the formidable defenses. And now these defenses have been cracked. Russia has taken over the entire city. I've done a video about the aftermath of this fighting, and Russian forces continue moving even beyond the city, which is interesting because many Western analysts are claiming that Russia suffered astronomical, unsustainable losses both in manpower and armor, and yet they still have the fighting capacity to continue beyond Avdiivka. How can that be? And some Western analysts have even asked that question. It has never occurred to them that these open source intelligence projects they get Russian losses, the numbers of Russian losses from, maybe they're just actually serving as war propaganda and generating unrealistically high numbers. That has, honestly, I've not heard anyone question their sources. I want to read this article. Russia's aggressive attrition cracks Fortress Avdeevka. I talk specifically about aggressive attrition. I've talked about this in previous videos. I go into it in more depth in this article. So I'm going to read the article in case people don't like reading and would rather listen to me read it. I also will interject additional information if and when necessary. So let me begin. The term aggressive attrition is coined by geopolitical analyst Alexander Mercouris of the Duran, can be described as a strategy of deliberately and aggressively creating strategic and political dilemmas, compelling an adversary to commit large amounts of manpower, equipment, and ammunition to well-prepared areas of operation. Russia has employed this strategy successfully across the line of contact in Ukraine over the course of its special military operation following its beginning in February 2022. We have to remember that Russia began the operation by storming into Ukraine when the front line was fully established. That is when Russia began its campaign of aggressive attrition. The strategy is part of a long-term process of degrading Ukrainian military capabilities, fulfilling the demilitarization component of the special military operations stated objectives. Remember, Russian President Vladimir Putin, when the special military operation began, stated three primary objectives: protection of the people of the Donbas, denazification, demilitarization of Ukraine. Russia is successfully achieving this by leveraging its large advantage in military industrial production, creating larger amounts of long-range fire capabilities than Ukraine can field, and using it to target and degrade Ukrainian defenses. Ukrainian forces are compelled to either suffer significant losses by maintaining these defenses or withdraw. For mainly political reasons, Ukraine has consistently decided to hold defenses long after Russian forces have created effective areas of operation in which aggressive attrition unfolds. In other words, Russia prepares an area of operation for aggressive attrition. They have their infantry, their armor, behind that, artillery, rockets, missiles, military aviation overhead, plus a large variety of drones. And they begin systematically dismantling the defenses and the troops and equipment manning them. Ukraine does not have sufficient long-range fires to match Russian firepower, so they will always be at the losing end in any area of operation Russia sets up. Their choice is to suffer huge losses while being outgunned, or withdrawing. and forcing Russia to move forward and then set up these areas of operation again. The most recent example of this is the Donetsk city of Avdiivka, where Ukrainian forces constructed formidable defenses built up since 2014. Russian infantry, armor, and artillery have faced off against Ukrainian forces there since the special military operation began. But as Russian military capabilities grew in quantity and quality, these Ukrainian defenses were no longer viable. Despite the extensive network of trenches, bunkers, tunnels, and the use of multi-story concrete residential buildings, as well as a large industrial zone to the north of the city, Ukrainian forces began suffering unsustainable losses. When Ukrainian forces were finally ordered to withdraw, the BBC reported Russian forces outgunned their Ukrainian counterparts 10-1. So that is in a video from BBC News. Ukraine frontline fighting, retreat from Avdiivka, BBC News.
President Zelensky said his soldiers had been outgunned 10-1 and made an urgent appeal for more weapons from the international community.
Link to this will be in the video description below, and you could watch the whole video. Russia did this by leveraging its greater number of infantry and armor, as well as its larger volumes of artillery fire. This includes 122 and 152 millimeter artillery pieces, as well as a variety of multiple launch rocket systems ranging from unguided area effect systems like the BM-21 Grad to satellite guided rocket systems like the Tornado S, Russia's equivalent to the US-made HIMARS and M270 MLRSs. And those have GPS-guided rockets. Russia has GLONASS-guided rockets. While Ukraine has attempted to offset its growing disadvantage in artillery fire through the use of first-person view kamikaze drones, according to Ukrainian forces themselves, Russia enjoyed at least a 2-to-1 advantage in this capability in and around Avdiivka. In addition to first-person view drones, Russia employs longer-range kamikaze drones, including the Lancet, with a range of up to 40 kilometers, making it an effective counter-battery capability. And counter-battery means anti-artillery. Russian forces use spotter drones to find Ukrainian artillery positions. They guide in a Lancet kamikaze drone up to 40 kilometers, and Russia has been extending the range of the Lancet system throughout this conflict. It'll find the artillery piece, and then it'll dive into it, destroying both the artillery piece and usually ammunition stored in large quantities nearby. Russia is using other long-range fire capabilities Ukraine does not possess an equivalent to, like the Iskander short-range ballistic missile complex with a range of up to 500 kilometers, further than the U.S. Army Tactical Missile System, or ATACMS, which has a range of approximately 300 kilometers. We continuously hear about how the U.S. is going to send, they already have sent ATACMS, they will send others, more of them, longer-range versions of them, but even the longer-range versions of ATACMS fall short of the Iskander missile complex. Not only that, Russia simply has more Iskander missile launchers and the missiles themselves than Ukraine will ever have in terms of launchers and ATACMS missiles. Russia is also leveraging its advantage in military aviation and the use of a growing assortment of glide bombs ranging from 250 to 1,500 kilograms, released at ranges outside what remains of Ukraine's mobile air defense systems along the line of contact. The larger of the glide bombs have a destructive capacity far exceeding that of artillery shells and even rockets and missiles, capable of penetrating bunkers and leveling even the largest concrete buildings being used as cover. To defend against glide bombs, Ukraine has attempted to move its less mobile, longer-range air defense systems like the Patriot, NASAMS, the German-made Iris-T, dangerously close to the line of contact. This allows for random and infrequent ambushes along the line of contact, but is insufficient to provide actual air defense for the line of contact. So what Ukraine does is move these longer range, less mobile systems. You can move them, but you have to set them up. In order for them to operate, then you have to pack them up for transport and move them someplace else. And this makes them very vulnerable to attack. So the closer they get to the line of contact, the more Russian weapon systems they are in range of. that can identify and destroy it. And Ukraine has lost air defense systems attempting to use this strategy. And they're able to surprise Russian aircraft operating in the area for the moment they switch them on and try to target any Russian aircraft operating in the area. These are random ambushes. It raises the cost of the operation for Russia, but it does not deter Russia from using its significant and growing military aviation advantage. The number of these longer range air defense systems, the number of them is very small. And I talk about that next. So I said it's insufficient to provide actual air defense for the line of contact. Then I say this is because Ukraine faces a critical shortage of long-range air defense systems. Over the past 2 years, Russia's significant and growing military industrial output has enabled a steady cadence of long-range cruise missile and kamikaze drone strikes on targets all across Ukraine, exhausting Ukraine's supply of air defense interceptors. This long-range strike campaign has also targeted and destroyed Ukraine's air defense systems themselves. So they were targeting different facilities, different aspects of Ukrainian infrastructure across the country. Ukraine had to use its long-range air defense systems to try and intercept these missiles and drones. So they were exhausting their supply of interceptors. But when Russia located the air defense systems themselves, they would attack those as well. The article continues, Western analysts have limited their study of the ongoing conflict to the 3 dimensions of the here and now. They classify battlefield achievements only by territorial gains. Because relatively little territory is changing hands, Western analysts have concluded the conflict is a stalemate. They also conclude Russia lacks sufficient offensive potential to break the stalemate based solely on the lack of large-scale Russian offensive operations. Yet, Russia's success in Avdiivka contradicts this claim and demonstrates the impact aggressive attrition is having along the rest of the line of contact. There are many different achievements possible on and off a battlefield, many of which can ultimately shape the outcome of any ongoing conflict far beyond territorial gains or losses. Russia's military-industrial base, already far ahead of the collective West, continues to grow in both the quantity of weapons and ammunition produced and the types of capabilities being fielded, as The Guardian recently admitted. So there's a whole article from The Guardian right here. It's titled "A Lot Higher Than We Expected. Russian Arms Production Worries Europe's War Planners." Moscow's massively ramped up its industry, giving it advantages in Ukraine and leading to a redistribution of wealth. And it's all about all of the things that I have been saying for the last 2 years. It's just the Western media finally admitting to all of these things. On the battlefield, over the past 2 years, Russia has patiently and systematically depleted Ukrainian military capabilities to now critical levels. It is clear, especially after the decisive defeat of Ukraine's 2023 offensive, that Russia launching its own offensive into likewise well-prepared minefields protected by long-range artillery and an array of armor and anti-tank weapons would be strategically unwise. Reducing these capabilities now shapes the battlefield for offensive operations later. In other words, Ukraine's 2023 offensive was a disaster. Russia decisively defeated it. And this is because Russia outgunned, outnumbered, and had well-prepared defenses waiting for Ukrainian forces. The problem is that Ukraine can also set up minefields. They have artillery, they have drones, they have rockets and missiles that can target Russian forces as they try to breach these minefields, making a Russian offensive also very costly. Russia has the ability to wear Ukrainian forces down before launching any offensive. They have the long-range fires to do this. Ukraine does not. So this gives them an advantage. This gives them an option to exercise rather than launching an offensive headlong into well-prepared defenses like Ukraine did. Ukraine did not have a choice. That was their only choice, other than obviously to negotiate and end the war. That is actually their best and only good option. Russia's strategy consists of multiple distinctively different stages spanning a period of time. It also consists of smaller operations using aggressive attrition along the line of contact at specific locations like Avdiivka, contributing toward an accumulative cycle of aggressive attrition against Ukrainian forces in general. Local collapses in Ukraine's fighting capacity are contributing to a much greater overall reduction in Ukrainian military capabilities. And I just heard Western analysts at a CSIS discussion online. I'll put the link to it in the video description below. And one of the participants said, sure, Russia took Avdiivka, but at what cost? Look at the heavy costs they paid. And they were referring to these absurd so-called open source intelligence numbers claiming Russia lost something like 17,000 troops and huge amounts of armor.
But I think that the Ukrainians and the Europeans should be pushing the fact that, yes, the Russians got Avdiivka, but at what cost? And look at the rest of that map. Are they going to be able to pay that cost all along that front?
Whatever the cost was for Russia to take Avdiivka, one of the most heavily fortified cities Ukraine has held along the line of contact, because of the overall daily attrition Russia inflicts on Ukrainian manpower, equipment, ammunition levels, depleting Ukraine's military fighting capacity faster than the West can help it reconstitute it. It is not going to pay the same price along the rest of the line of contact. So again, this is a problem many Western analysts seem to have. They're only looking at it in 3 dimensions, the here and now. You need to add the 4th dimension of time into your analysis. You need to think about how it's going to change over time. It is not going to be linear across the entire line of contact. As time passes, if Ukrainian military capabilities are being diminished, the Russians are not going to pay the same price for the next city that they take. It's very simple, actually. The article continues, inevitably this process will result in disproportionately large Ukrainian casualties, territorial losses, and refugee flows. It might even lead Ukraine into a disadvantageous peace, as warned in the RAND Corporation's 2019 paper extending Russia competing from advantageous ground regarding the dangers of Washington providing lethal aid to Ukraine and provoking a large-scale conflict with Russia. So that is this paper here that I've referenced many, many times before. It was published in 2019, and that is exactly what they warned about. If you provoke this conflict with Russia, Russia escalates, Russia commits to a large-scale military operation in Ukraine, that is going to be a likely outcome. And we see this manifesting itself as I speak. This is how I conclude the article. And if this is the dilemma the US and its allies find themselves in waging proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, a similar dilemma on a vastly greater scale awaits US foreign policy makers in regards to the war they seek to provoke with China. Unfortunately, US foreign policy circles are so absorbed by their pursuit of US primacy, they have failed to understand how unachievable it is in the first place. I have explained relentlessly over the past 2 years how unsustainable this proxy war is for the US and its allies in Ukraine. I have explained the deficiencies, the fundamental deficiencies of not just the US military industrial base, but the collective West's military industrial base, this for-profit system that it is a part of, and how this inhibits it from matching, let alone exceeding, the military industrial capacity of just Russia with half the population of the US. We always hear about how much larger the US GDP is than Russia's, and how much more the US spends on the military than Russia does, and how inconceivable it is that the US is not going to be able to support Ukraine for as long as it takes for Ukraine to win. And yet, before our very eyes, we see the exact opposite happening. That is because while it is true the US has a larger population, a larger GDP, and it most certainly does spend much more money on its military than Russia does on its own armed forces, the way you spend the money is of utmost importance. If most of it is going to the profits of private industry, then you are not going to be producing the tangible weapons and ammunition needed to outpace the Russians. The Russians have a purpose-driven industrial base comprised of state-owned enterprises, and they're prioritizing purpose over profit. They're going to outproduce the United States. It's as simple as that. China not only has a purpose-driven industrial base, and of course a purpose-driven military industrial base, they also have a larger population and by certain metrics a larger economy than the United States. As a matter of fact, in some regards, China outmatches the G7 combined. So if the United States and its allies are having these problems with the Russians in Eastern Europe, they're going to have these problems on a much greater scale, as I warned in the article. In Asia Pacific, don't forget, it's not just a mismatch between China's military industrial base and its military capabilities versus the US. It's also the amount of distance the US has to travel to provoke its war with China in the first place. It has to cross the entire Pacific Ocean to wage war against China. It has to sustain that war across the entire Pacific Ocean. And as unrealistic as it sounds, military and political leaders all throughout history have attempted to achieve similar ambitions. Think about Napoleon and his attempts to fight and defeat Russia. How he overextended his army, how he stranded them deep inside Russia during the winter. That is what the United States will be doing, but just on a vastly larger scale in the Asia Pacific region. Aggressive attrition. This almost certainly is the strategy Russia is employing. I do not have access to the Russian general staff. I cannot say for sure. It seems as if they are determined to destroy as much of the Ukrainian military as possible before taking large amounts of Ukrainian territory, if that is indeed their objective. If they are successfully diminishing Ukrainian combat power faster than the West can reconstitute it, that means at some point in the future, they will have a much more optimal opportunity to launch an offensive and suffer fewer casualties and expend less ammunition, energy, manpower, equipment on the offensive. So why launch it now? Why take huge tracts of territory now? With all of that in mind, if you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do and it helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. Please check the video description for all of the links that I referenced in this article and in this video. Also in the video description below are ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel or any of the social media platforms I'm on. If ads pop up, feel free to skip past them. If you do want to support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also Patreon. To everyone who is helping support my work, I greatly appreciate that, whether it's a one-time donation, donations month to month, or even if you're just sharing my work, getting the word out there. I greatly appreciate all of that. That is what makes this work possible. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.